Hello, my name is Mary McConnell. I'm from the Office of Research and Innovation. And today we have with us Debra Saffer from the Center for Career Development. And she's going to be talking about resume building. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here today. I am the Assistant Director and Career Consultant for Science, Engineering, and Healthcare, and I'm really excited to be here today. Today, I'm going to talk about resume building and interviewing. As we think about building a resume, it's really important to think about what a resume actually is as you create one. The resume in itself is not designed to obtain the position. The resume is designed to intrigue an employer enough for the employer to interview you. The interview and the resume together are designed to obtain the opportunity. An interview should really be viewed as a marketing piece to get the interview. It really serves as a bit of an advertisement that showcases skills and experience, and any experience that's relevant. And every resume should be targeted to the position utilizing keywords to help you obtain the experience. As a marketing tool, your resume should summarize your skills, strengths, and experiences. Above all, it should be easy to read so that an employer wants to take a look at it. And above all else, it should be accurate, and you should be honest as you write it. As you think about your resume, it should not include complete sentences or paragraphs because that makes it difficult to read. I recommend that you use bullet points because that helps direct an employer's eye to what the important points are. You should definitely avoid using personal pronouns such as I, we, or my. You should definitely make sure that you use a singular font on the resume. You should definitely not include a photograph. We strongly encourage you not to use graphics. Now, there are exceptions to that. If you are in a creative field, such as graphic design, for example, then you could consider using perhaps maybe a singular graphic or a design element, but to use it very sparingly. You definitely want to make sure that you do not include your high school diploma after your freshman year. You definitely want to avoid using any sort of information around hobbies or personal interests. Now, if by chance your personal interests or hobbies happen to show themselves in any sort of leadership positions that you had, that's okay. But you definitely don't want to list hobbies or personal interests unto themselves just for that reason. Gender, date of birth, that information is not to be included. You certainly do not want to include any salary expectations. That's for much later in the process. You definitely do not want to include a reference list or a list of supervisors in your resume. You want to make sure that that is a separate document in the process. In terms of the layout and the format of a resume, you want to make sure above all else that the resume is attractive and then it's easy to read and skim. On average, employers spend about 5 to 10 seconds initially looking at the resume. So therefore, it really needs to kind of have the ability for an employer to take a look at it very quickly. We strongly recommend that for students and new graduates that the resume be one page. And that really requires you to use your space wisely. Definitely want to make sure that you pay attention to the margins that you use. We strongly recommend that when you set the margins on the document that you do that first. Maybe margins about a ½ inch, no smaller or no larger than 3/4 of an inch, because the margins that you set are going to dictate how much text that you can fit on the page left to right. We suggest that you use a font size of anywhere from 11 to 12-point fonts. Usually the first thing that people do when they run out of space is they start to shrink the font size. And that's difficult because, again, especially if someone is reading it on the computer screen, when you start to shrink the font size, it becomes harder to see. The font that you use is very important as well because it has to be easy to see. You want to avoid using fonts that the letters are very ornate. So fonts like Helvetica and Gothic, where the fonts are ornate, or script fonts are very hard to see. So we recommend using fonts like Arial, Times New Roman, block-oriented fonts are very good for a resume. So before you begin writing, you need to do some preparation. Ideally, you want to identify your strengths because these are what you're going to be emphasizing. it's a good idea to research the employer and the position that you'll be applying for. Now, if you are not yet going to be applying for a position, maybe identify a potential employer and a potential position, because this will help you kind of target the resume that you might kind of be utilizing. Because what you're going to be doing here is making them match. Think about kind of what you might be kind of aiming for as you write the document. So let's maybe walk step by step through a resume section by section. Now, there's some standard sections that you'll most likely have. When you talk about your education section, which usually comes pretty close to the top of the resume after your heading information, your name, your contact information, you're going to make sure you include the degree, the official name of the degree that you're receiving, the university, the city, the state. You're going to include the official name of the major and your expected graduation date. And it's important to note that if you are unsure of any of the official information, it's always a good idea to check your unofficial transcript just to make sure you have the details 100% correct. Now, with your experience, you may choose to divide your experience into two. You may have one experience category, which is fine. However, if you have a variety of experience, some of it related and some of it not, you might choose to divide that experience category in that way. That ensures that your related or relevant experience will come first so that the employer will see it first. And ideally, that experience would be related to the position you're applying for. And then afterwards, you can have what we like to call additional experience that is not necessarily related to the positions for which you seek. We strongly recommend that you have a skills section, and the skills that you'll talk about you will tailor this to the position. So if you're applying to a position that requires highly technical skills, we strongly recommend that you mention those technical skills in the skills section. Now, it's always a good idea to have activities or involvement section. If you have leadership abilities, or if you've had leadership positions, it's always a good idea to include leadership as well. And you very well might, if you have multiple leadership positions, actually have a leadership section. Now, if you recall, we talked about leaving your high school diploma off your resume. However, if you've had positions of leadership in high school, if you've been involved in high school and you're a freshman or a sophomore, you may include these types of things from your high school experience. But be aware that these things may drop off your resume as you progress through your time at Duquesne. It's just a good idea to remember that as you go through. As you change, remember that your resume is also going to change. Now, there's also some options that you have when putting your resume together. Oftentimes, you may have heard people talk about a career objective statement. Career objectives are optional. Most often, we see them written in terms of internship opportunities. When you apply for an internship, the chances are good that you may not necessarily have a lot of related experience in your field yet, and that's okay. That's why you're seeking an internship, right? Well, a career objective statement really focuses on what you're looking for, and will also give some information about maybe what sort of skills you offer to the employer. So it's fine to say that you're looking for an internship in the field of accounting, but it's perhaps even better to say that you're looking to obtain an internship in the field of accounting that utilizes your detail-oriented skills, because that way an employer knows what you're offering them as well as what you're hoping to receive. You can also list your GPA. It's a good idea for an employer to know how well you're doing academically. And we strongly recommend that if your GPA is above a 3.0, that you do include it so an employer is aware of that. Oftentimes 3.0 is that benchmark that an employer looks for. If you have done study abroad, it's a good idea to include it. It's a great conversation point in an interview. If you have obtained any honors, awards, and again, if you've held any leadership positions, it's a good idea to mention that. It's fine to give the name of the organization. If perchance that organization is a Greek lettered organization, it's always a good idea to give the descriptive information because an employer may not instantly remember or recall the exact descriptor of that organization. As you can see here, if you're a member of Beta Alpha Psi, someone may not immediately recall that that's the National Honorary Accounting Fraternity, but the person here has listed that for the employer's benefit. If you have any licenses or certificates, it's great to list that as well. It really helps answer questions for an employer. So for example, the person here has a pharmacy intern license. And if you'll notice, they actually were very detail oriented. Pennsylvania is a commonwealth, not a state. So the person has actually been very accurate and listed that accordingly. If you have any publications, presentations, or research that you've done, it's a really good idea to list that. They've listed the complete details. They've been very specific, and that's really important. And the same is true with any memberships as well, to give that information here. Now, when you put items in a section, we do this in reverse chronological order, which is basically a fancy way of saying reverse order in all the sections. Basically start with your most recent start dates and you work backwards in time. And we do this because it gives an employer easy access to the information. It helps them scan it easily when they do that 5 to 10 second look through. And they really appreciate that. It helps them really kind of take a look at it very, very quickly, which is what they're doing. By far, the most difficult part of writing a resume is the language that we use, because we write in a very different way. The language that we use is very crisp, very succinct, and is very expressive. We don't use personal pronouns. We try to say things very, very brief. Definitely watch the verb tenses that you use. And we strongly recommend that when you do start your phrases, you use action verbs and very powerful phrases that accurately express what it is that's actually happening. Make sure that you put your name, if you want to put your address, that's fine. You can give 2 addresses, a current address and a permanent address if you like. Make sure that you give a telephone number with an area code. When you put your email address, make sure that it's an appropriate email address. If you want to put your LinkedIn profile address, certainly you can, but just make sure that your LinkedIn profile is filled out and complete. Make sure that your education has the correct and complete degree. Make sure that you have the correct month and year of graduation. Make sure that you have your major, minor, and if you have an area of concentration, make sure that is there and correct. So for example, this person here is getting a physics degree. They actually are receiving a Bachelor of Science from Duquesne. They've listed their graduation date. They've listed their major, and as you can see, because their GPA is above a 3.0, they have elected to include their GPA. So they have kind of met all of those appropriate criteria for the correct education listing. When you list your experience, you're going to want to put your title of the position that you've had. Make sure it is accurate, and if you're unsure, you need to ask your employer. So if it's a current employer, just ask. If it's a previous employer, send an email. Every organization has some sort of HR department, so just send an email and ask the name of the employer organization, the city and state that they're located, and just make sure you have the correct beginning and ending dates of employment. And again, like I said, every organization has a human resources department. Just ask them, they'll be able to tell you. Give in those bullet points major responsibilities, accomplishments, quantify things when possible, and start those bullet points with action verbs. And speaking of action verbs, here's a couple samples of really great action verbs. These action verbs really explain things in not a lot of space and time. Collaborated, directed, improved, surpassed, facilitated. These are very strong things that actually describe what people do in their daily life and work. Make sure that you quantify where possible. So when you say that you increased membership by 30%, that really has a lot of power. Make sure that you talk about the individuals that you're interacting with. Explain what's going on and talk about the results of your work. Make sure that you put bullet points under the positions that they refer to. And always remember that you can include any sort of volunteer work if it's relevant to the position that you're applying for. So here's an example of an experience. This person was a program assistant with the Senior Citizens Coalition. You can see that they've listed the dates, and you can see some of the verbs that they've used highlighted in red. Now, if you notice, they've actually listed several action verbs for some of these. You can see that they have listed multiple verbs in some of these cases. You can see they've also quantified several things. They've quantified the number of individuals. So they've planned and implemented these programs and increased participation by 40 people. So they've talked about the increases. They talked about how many volunteers they coordinated. They actually referenced the name of the program that they coordinated. And they actually listed the different actions that they did for these volunteers in the program. So they've really said a lot in not a lot of space, which is kind of what we're going for here. There's a lot of impact in these three statements, and that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to go for high impact and not a lot of language. So again, we talked about how we could possibly divide our experience into two sections. Again, if there are things that are particularly relevant, we could possibly have a relevant experience section. Now, oftentimes I've actually seen people have a other experience section. I'd recommend possibly having, maybe retitling that section as additional experience, just because it sounds more professional. Using that word additional actually kind of gives that feeling of there's more rather than other. The word other means it's not important, and it is important. So let's use the word additional there. And you can kind of see how that looks. So here this person probably has a information systems management degree. So in their relevant experience, they have their internship in the information technology department at Del Monte Foods. They talked about, they developed IT projects, they organized and documented process design, and then they create and maintain product schedules. Their additional experience was their cashier position at Giant Eagle. And the reason they included the additional experience is because, and why would an employer find this relevant, is because when an employer looks at your experience, they see that this person actually did both of these positions at the same time. Not only was this person doing an internship in the information technology department at Del Monte Foods, but they were also handling the role as a cashier at Giant Eagle during the same exact time period. And that's important because that tells the employer that this person can juggle multiple responsibilities. They had to actually schedule their part-time work at Giant Eagle around their internship at Del Monte Foods. And that's important for the employer to know about this person. Your research experience is also important. It's a good opportunity to show your experience in your projects. So list the title of your research, the name of your lab, the fact that it was at Duquesne, and the dates. Use bullet points to describe the projects that you're working on. Remember your audience. Hopefully who's ever reading this will understand the technical language. And remember that research is a process. So use bullet points to explain the process. Maybe you inherited the project from someone else. Use bullet points to explain where in the process you picked it up. Maybe the project was brand new and you had to start from the ground up. Maybe you had to formulate the research question. Maybe you had to conduct the entire literature review all by yourself. Maybe you had to pivot the project because you weren't seeing the literature review that you were hoping, or maybe you had to change the research question halfway through. Maybe you weren't getting the results you were hoping and you had to change the process. It's your research, so definitely make sure that you reflect that in the bullet points that you're using. And I just listed an example here for you. Again, just making sure that you document everything accurately. I've listed some very good action verbs that are research related. So investigated, conducted, obtained, evaluated, determined. So again, just making sure that you think about your process. Okay, this is very individual. So you are the content expert here and you need to make sure that you focus on what you were doing. And I always advise people, imagine that you are describing the research process to someone who doesn't know what research is at all, and that you had to explain it to them from pretty much the ground up. Write that down, because that will help you as you formulate these bullet points. Activities. A lot of you are very involved, and I think that it's great for you to showcase that, because again, this is another part of your life that an employer really wants to know about. It's really good for you to show that. And again, as a freshman or sophomore, it's good for you to maybe incorporate some things in high school. And even if you're a junior or a senior, perhaps it might be relevant to the position, you never know. Again, if you have leadership positions, you may actually want to have a dedicated leadership section. It often includes volunteer work as well, so do consider that. Here, this individual decided to actually separate some of their leadership activities into a leadership section unto itself, because there were several. So here you can see they took their vice presidency of Phi Beta Epsilon fraternity and placed that there. They also, because they were on a committee, they were a member on a committee, they put that in the leadership as well. They chose to use a bullet point to talk about discussing budget allocations and put it there. Notice they also put some numerics there. They talked about how much money they were talking about allocating, and they talked about how many organizations they were dispersing that budget money amongst. And then of course, they also then combined activities and volunteer work. They talked about the rowing team membership, and they talked about their volunteer work with WTAE Project Bundle Up. And again, they took a bullet point there and talked about what they were doing with those coats. And they also mentioned the age range of the children that those coats were going to be distributed to. So again, there's some quantification going on there about the children there. So definitely kind of think about some of the options that you have about how you can describe what's going on. Again, there's a lot of details that are happening, but really we're not using a lot of text to do so. So we're going to kind of switch gears here very quickly. We're going to talk about some interview strategies, because once you put together a great resume, knowing that you have pretty much one page to do so, there's going to be a lot of detail that maybe you can't mention. But an interview is really your opportunity. Once you get interest from an employer, they contact you, they want to interview you, your interview is the opportunity for you to give further detail, to elaborate, and to, in essence, start telling some very focused stories about things that you may not have been able to say on that resume. Okay, you've generated enough interest, they've contacted you. When you get into that interview, that's your opportunity to really let them get to know you much better. During the interview, the employer is going to have some pretty pointed questions for you. You will get an opportunity probably for some open-ended questions as well. And there's some strategies that you can use to really guide the conversation there as well. Now, I've been doing this work a long time, and I am very convinced that the key to a successful interview is preparation. I like to say that success of an interview really happens before anyone goes anywhere, before any conversation is started, because I think the preparation that you do is really where success happens. I think really what you can do is do your homework, as they say. When you do research, I think that finding out as much as you can about the organization, about the position, and obviously doing your research on yourself, I think those things are really where the success happens. Now, doing the research about the organization is key. Now, I'm not saying that you need to memorize a whole bunch of facts and be able to parrot them back to the employer, is what we're talking about here. Yes, you do need to know something about the organization and their history. I think that, yes, if you can have a general sense of how long the organization has been around and really what drove them to come into existence and what their organization has been founded upon in terms of principles and ideals. That's very helpful, because I think that's where an organization really kind of builds its foundation. I think that's important. I think it's really good to kind of get a sense of kind of what the organization at its heart does, and kind of where it really kind of gets its heart and soul in a way. I think that really understanding the core products, services, resources of an organization, like kind of what does it provide, what does it do in essence, is important. Understanding in general how you see it functioning as best you can is good. I think it's very helpful if you have any contacts in the organization to talk to them ahead of time. That's always a great idea if that's available to you, ideally, of course. Definitely getting a sense of like what its mission, what its values are. That is very important. Because good organizations really should operate with its core mission and values in mind. Ideally, that guides what it does, or should guide what it does. I think that really understanding yourself and what's important to you, I think, is helpful. Understanding what it is that you want to communicate to that organization. Because I think that as you get the opportunity to answer those open-ended questions, those things are going to be what you're going to highlight as you think about how you should answer questions. Those are going to be those guiding key principles. That's how you're going to answer those key points that you're going to want to offer in those answers. Knowing what sort of skills, abilities that you're going to want to highlight, that's going to be how you select your answers. As you think about preparing for your interview, you're going to want to make sure that you have everything you need. You're definitely going to want to consider how you're going to dress for the interview. And this applies even if your interview is virtual. We've seen a lot of hilarious and humorous YouTube videos and things online about people and camera angles, being dressed appropriately, in a shirt and tie, and then wearing gym shorts, and that being uncovered. Sometimes on national TV while doing the weather, for example, you want to dress appropriately, completely, from your head to your toe. Even if you're doing a virtual interview. When you're doing an in-person interview, of course, professional attire, a suit, with a jacket is the standard for a professional interview. If you're ever unsure, the Center for Career Development has some great resources in our handshake system with some visuals for what is appropriate interview attire. I strongly recommend that you check those out, because for many of you, if this is your first professional interviewing situation, you may not be 100% sure about what that is. We have some great visuals there to guide you as well. And of course, the staff of the Center for Career Development is always available for individual appointments. We're definitely glad to show you the resources that we have and to help guide you there. One of the things that's perhaps most difficult about interviewing are the questions that folks get asked. So also in Handshake, we have listings of common interview questions, and they range from the very basic, tell me about yourself, to the very specific questions. So we definitely recommend that you prepare for some of those common questions. There's specific strategies that go into answering a lot of those questions, and certainly, taking some time to review those questions, thinking about how to answer, working with your career consultant to come up with strategies to answering those questions is helpful. We definitely recommend when you're asked behavioral questions to think about kind of how you're going to do that. Now, behavioral questions are questions that ask you to talk about a time when you exhibited a specific behavior or how you would handle a specific situation. And we recommend using the STAR system. Now, the STAR system stands for situation, task, action, and result. And basically, you would talk about the situation, the task at hand, and action that you took, and the result that happened. So that's something you would do. It's basically a little guide to telling a story to an interviewer about what happened in a situation and how you handled it. It's also important to note that you will be required to ask the interviewer questions. So we strongly recommend that you prepare questions in advance to ask the interviewer. As they say, practice makes perfect. And the Center for Career Development has you covered. We've given all students access to a wonderful practice tool called Big Interview. You can see the URL on the screen in front of you. It is a video interview system that all students have access to. You can use your duq.edu email when you register for the system. It'll basically use the technology on your laptop, your microphone, your camera, that will actually record you when you answer these practice interview questions, which you can review. You can send to friends or family for their feedback on how you perform. It's a great system. It's easy to use. It's available whenever you are, even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning. You can practice it in the privacy of your apartment or in your residence hall. It's a wonderful system. It really helps you hone your interviewing style. We definitely recommend that you consider virtual considerations when you're practicing, when you're doing interviews. You don't want the neighbor's dog barking when you're trying to handle a virtual interview. Think about your camera angles, think about your background and such. So definitely kind of thinking about that. It's really important that you think about what happens after interviewing. It might sound a little strange, but after the interview is done, how you follow up is critical. It's really important to send a thank you email to someone after you've interviewed with them. It might sound a little silly, it might sound like it doesn't make a difference, but I'm going to tell you that how you follow up means a lot. You may not be able to send an actual postal thank you note, with people working remotely and such, but even sending a thank you email means a lot. It sets you apart from other people. It's a mark of interest. It's a mark of someone who is engaged, and it's a really good mark of courtesy that really sets you apart. So I strongly encourage you, as you think about wanting to make sure that you maintain a professional presence, to really invest yourself in the process, because it does pay off in the end. So maybe we have a little time to see if anybody has any questions.
Sure, I have one. Deb, thanks for the presentation. That was very thorough, and I appreciated at the end about the interview strategies. That's just as important, like you said. Now, one question I have is, kind of in this world we live in today, how important is LinkedIn as a supplemental resource to the resume?
That's a great question. I think that LinkedIn is incredibly important. LinkedIn is, it's really important to have a LinkedIn presence. I feel like it is the way that networking is done. I like to say that it's about networking or not working. You connect to everyone in some ways. It's about kind of who you're connected to. Networking helps you not only with what you know, but also who you know. So I would say that it's a good practice for everyone to have a LinkedIn profile. I think it should be filled out to some degree in most cases. And I think that it's just a good idea as a matter of practice to take some time every so often to make sure it's updated, and to really make use of it every once in a while, to contribute to it, to give endorsements, to contribute to just the environment. But I think it's a good idea, to compliment others, to congratulate others, to thank others, to contribute to the environment, and not just use it when you quote unquote need a job.
Okay, thank you. And I guess a unrelated question. When you were talking about the appropriate dress for interview, made me think about the career closet. Is that still a thing on campus for students who might need that?
Absolutely, yes. The Center for Career Development offers the Career Closet to students who are in need of professional attire. If students would need that, all they would have to do is contact the Center for Career Development to make arrangements to visit the Career Closet, and a staff member would be happy to arrange that for them.
Very cool. Thank you.
Other questions?
I don't have a question, but that was wonderful. And the Career Closet sounds like a great resource. And thanks, Luke, for that question about LinkedIn, because I always wonder that, I try to keep mine up to date, and I do frequently get new contact requests from there. But I mean, honestly, when we're looking at new candidates, which is rare, but when we have, I mean, that's kind of one of the first places that I personally will hop. I'm like, I'm going to look at their LinkedIn, and yeah, they might have given us their resume, but there might be additional things on there or connections that we have with other people. So it's a really interesting resource.
And that's good to know, because I am notoriously bad at keeping mine updated. So knowing that is good, like that it is important to maintain that online presence there in the world we live in today.
And Deb, I also thought that your points about Zoom interviews or virtual interviews and how you present yourself and everything was important too, especially because a lot of those are, at least initial interviews now, are often conducted, and they might, moving forward in the future, continue to be even post-pandemic. It might continue to be, especially for things that are far away, rather than traveling just for an initial interview. So it's an interesting consideration. Okay, well, I guess if there's nothing else, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for presenting. And we will make this recording available to students so that they can check it out after the fact.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.